Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have with us Adam Nigh. Um, he is a brother, a colleague, a mentor, and he's words can't express being able to know Adam, I think since 2014, 2015, maybe, since William Jessup.
Yeah, I started it in 2015 at Jessup. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so blessed that our paths crossed. So many things happened, and I think uh for both of us, just that saying, was it Tolkien? Not all who wander are lost. And we've done quite a bit of wandering the last few years,
Mm.
but finding some stability. But well, on top of that, we know our journey continues to go. And I'm glad to share, just cross paths with them again. Um, we shared a classroom and we've shared students,
Mhm.
and your name comes up a lot when I talk with students,
Mm.
and they're especially, uh, you know, in regards to music, faith, or just someone that they could just feel safe around. And
Mm.
so, and Adam has given me so many words of advice. So he has this light. Oh, not to mention he's an awesome husband, a father, something I've never experienced. So seeing him go through these things, I'm always picking his brain and just watching. And so everything that I've gathered to be able to survive, um, I'm I'm hoping that he can share that same profound wisdom with the rest of us. So one of the prerequisites of being on is wearing your favorite shirt. Adam, what do you have on, and what can you tell us about what you have on?
This is my band. Too Bad Eugene is a band I started in 1998, and it ran till 2002, and then kind of fizzled. There was another band after that that fizzled more. And then I kind of wasn't involved in music since about 2004 or five.
Okay.
But then in 2000, it was like my New Year's resolution of 2021 that I was like, it's kind of, coming out of the shutdown and stuff.
Mm,
I mean, we were still in the shutdown
yeah.
in New Year 2021, but I was like, I'm resurrecting Too Bad Eugene. I want to get back at it. I'd been thinking a lot about it over the previous couple of months. And so, yeah, we've been back in action since, like January 2021. So, like the past 3 years.
Where can we find your music?
Um, all the places, Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, uh, with YouTube. We're on ones like there's a thing called Deezer, which is like specific to France, and we're on that. But we
Wow.
also we have vinyl. Our first and third records, and then our fourth, which is coming in March. The vinyl probably won't be in hand till April, but all of those are available from our record label, which is called People of Punk Rock Records. If you Google People of Punk Rock Records, you'll get their online store, and you can get CDs and vinyl and all the cool stuff.
And by the time we publish this on YouTube, send me a link and I'll put them in the description, folks.
Cool,
So you'll have that available.
awesome.
All right. What are you passionate about? Name as many passions, no, not as many passions as possible. You're passionate about a lot of things. Uh, what would you say a few of the things that you're passionate about, and how'd you get there?
I would say for sure um, the three things I am most passionate about are theology, you know, the study of God's word, the study of God, um, music, um, and and family. Um, I'm definitely, yeah, as you said, I'm a husband and a father, and I'm married into a pretty close knit extended
Mm,
family, and we spend a lot of time together. But I also love my parents, and so yeah, all of those relationships, those are things that I care a lot about. So yeah, I mean, I want to say that third one, I feel like is, I don't know, maybe just universal. So maybe two things that are like unique
Yeah.
to me that are like, that are my passions are theology and music.
Well, in regards to music, how so did you grow up around music? Like, and so if you
Yeah,
grew up around it, did your parents press it upon you? And if they did, when did you own it for yourself?
certainly not pressed upon me. I would
Oh,
say,
okay.
yeah, like I was not one of these kids that I know you and I have a lot of whose
Yeah.
parents like kind of put them in piano lessons at like
Yeah.
3 or 4, and are kind of like,
Yeah.
made to play
Yeah.
music. For me, my dad was in a rock and roll band.
Mm,
From the time, oh, I mean, he's been in one since he was in college.
wow.
And then yeah, so all of my youth, they were active. They played, and they're popular, at least locally.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was always bands that did like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and
Mm,
the dancing songs. They would play the weddings and the events and
oh,
stuff, and people loved them. And all everybody I knew would love going to those events. And my dad was like the front man.
mm,
So yeah, from like a little kid, I'd be like, "Wow, look at dad! That's so cool. That's so fun." So nobody was pushing music on me like I had to do. I'm like, "Can I play with your guitar, Dad? Can I?" Um, so yeah, that was, and he started bringing me up on stage to
wow.
do like a song starting when I was like 7, and I loved that. So yeah, I was kind of born on stage.
Um, family. You know, how intentional, in your experience as a family man, do you have to be? What's your experience been? I mean, your wife has a close-knit family. Like, what kind of adjustments did you have to make?
Yeah, my wife and I talk about this a lot because we both came from strong,
Mm,
stable families. Like,
okay.
we lost my father-in-law in September, but he and my mother-in-law were, faithfully married right
Yeah.
up to the end, till
Yeah.
death do us part. My parents are still married.
Mm,
So yeah, we were just kind of raised in environments where that was normal. I think both of our parents talked to us about that. They were like,
mm,
when you make that decision,
yeah.
it's for life.
Yeah.
Um, and we grew up around divorce,
Mm,
um, but it didn't hit home for
okay.
either of us. So when when we got married, again, we had good counsel. They're like, it's going to be fun,
Yeah.
and then it's going to get hard, and you got to know it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And it's true, it was. But we
Yeah.
were like, all right, it got hard. Like we knew it would. So like,
Mm,
how do we press through that? And it's just a lot of getting over yourself. I
mm,
think is the main key to like uh, do your due diligence before
mm,
you make a
yeah.
covenantal commitment, and then once you've made it, stop thinking about whether that was the right decision and start just being ready to like
Mm,
own
yeah.
your own mistakes,
Yeah.
give up any delusion that you can fix the way they're thinking. You can never do that. You
Mm,
can only ever sort of be like, all right, how am I looking at this the wrong way?
yeah.
What ownership can I take for this conflict? Um, and yeah, over time, you just got to be willing to sort of be a little broken down by
Mm,
it. You know, there's a sense in which you just have to consistently let go of the
yeah.
things that you find yourself holding on to so tightly, and then as you let them go, you're like, oh, I didn't need that. And there's a greater freedom, and in that sense, I think on that level, marriage is just a microcosm of like
Oh,
relationships in general, because
yeah.
really what I just described is true in any deep friendship. You're going to have
Mm,
conflict. You're going to have
yeah.
you're going to have an inability to see the other person's perspective, and then you hit an impasse, and you have to decide, okay, how willing am I
Yeah.
to really get in that person's shoes and look at the
Mm,
situation from their
mm,
perspective. Um, and I think, I mean, relationships oftentimes just, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify. I know there's other
mm,
things, but like
yeah.
very often
Yeah.
relationships break down from like one of the parties just being,
Yeah.
nope, this is the reality. I don't have a perspective. I have the truth.
Yeah,
And he's
yeah,
not willing to reconsider that, then
yeah,
he just can't get it anywhere.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
that's I think that's been the fundamental key. Just that readiness and willingness to like um to be changed in the
yeah,
process.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I mean, the reason I bring that up is I just had a flashback of, um, so again, I'm people watching, I'm learning because I don't have any models. And so I remember back in at Jessup, we're sharing offices and, you're considering some positions as a college professor elsewhere. And you are just, you're not speaking to yourself. You're using me as a bouncing board, whatever you call it. But you're considering everything for your kids and your wife in the community and what does it look like. And I thought it was just so flawless. I was like, wow, he has conversations with his family, like, instead of being told, or my way or the highway.
You give me a lot of credit for that one. The situation in question was a job in the middle of Kansas, an hour away from Wichita. And Wichita is almost nowhere. This is an hour away. And the college was amazing, and the
Um,
position was just, it would have fit me so well. But it's like in the middle of nowhere where tornadoes happen. Um, and yes, I was considering
yeah,
from my wife and kids' perspective, but they never did offer me that job.
yeah,
And if they would have, I'm not sure. I would have. I mean, I think, of
yeah,
course, eventually my wife and I would have come to a consensus.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, but I like she went out with me
yeah.
for
Ah,
the
okay,
interview. Like
okay,
I was really stoked about that. Oh, the college,
yeah,
like they
yeah,
were willing to
yeah.
pay for her
Wow.
airfare, and like they took care of her. Like they flew her out with me
Yeah.
for the interview. That spoke to me a lot. And she's like, okay, that does mean something to me. But then
Mhm.
she saw it and she's like, nope. She's like, I'm sorry, there's no way I could live there or raise our kids there. And I was like, well, just keep thinking about it. So I think the Lord spared us from ever having to actually make a
Yeah,
decision.
yeah. But just what you said about deep friendship, and that's what it is, like to be considered, because when we look at our friends, we're considerate of them.
Mm.
Um, Now, in regards to what did you study in undergrad, grad school?
I started as a business major because
Oh,
I was so into music and I was thinking I don't only want to be a rock star, I want to like work for a record label and I want to like just do the music
wow.
business. Um, I'm so thankful that did not pan out because that was like 1996 that I went to college. And who knew that like 3 or 4 years later, the music business would just implode.
That's right.
Napster just
Napster, Napster. Yeah, that's
uh,
right. 19.
there was all these independent record labels in 1996. There was tons of like
Wow.
activity going on in the music business, and then it all just absolutely collapsed under Napster a few years later. So thank the Lord. Um, but so I started with that, but like I would do like a year of college and then take a semester off as I'd be like on tour
Mm,
with my band. I had a couple different bands at the time, and on those road trips we would talk theology. We would be in the van for hours, and we're all Christian guys,
mm,
and everybody creative but also fairly like intellectually minded.
yeah.
And so we would get into these conversations about theology, and I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, this is fascinating. And the singer of the first band that I did that with,
Mm,
he was really well read.
mm,
He was reading like Jonathan Edwards at the time. He had read a bit
wow.
of like John Calvin. And so when he spoke about theology, he was drawing from these resources
Mm,
besides like the
the
Bible
Bible. Yeah.
verses that he might have known. And for me, I was like totally ignorant about those things. And I was so like, wow, that's really cool that you've got, you have the Bible, but you also like you draw on these fathers of the church that
Mm,
like give you language for and ways of interpreting the Bible. And yeah, I was just like, I don't know anything about that. And so that was what developed for me like the desire to
wow.
switch majors. I'm like, I think I want to study that. So yeah, we got home from tour and I went to the closest Christian college I could find, which was Bethany
Wow.
College at the time up in Scotts Valley. And I just went to like, see, do you have a theology major? And they're like, yes, we do. I'm like, okay, I would like to sign up, please. And then yeah, so like I was already at that point I was about halfway through school, like credits wise. I was like
Mhm.
going into my junior year.
Yeah.
Uh, Almost. I had like a little bit of undergrad to complete, but I went to Bethany and I only took major classes. I had like
Mhm.
three more general ed classes, and I did those at Cabrillo, junior college,
Yeah.
at the same time. But it was 2 years of like five Bible and theology classes every semester, and I just drank it up.
Wow.
That's where I met Dan Albright. He was my professor for 2 or 3 years. Dan Albright was our mutual boss. That's how we
Yeah.
got to know each other when we were at Jessup years later. Um, but yeah, I was just addicted. And when I was graduating, I'm like, I need more.
Mm.
Uh, so I got my first job as a high school Bible teacher. I was like 23.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um, that was at Monte Vista Christian School. I gave myself 1 year to kind of get into the flow of being a teacher, and then I started classes for my master's degree in theology at Fuller Seminary. I did that very part time. I took like one class a quarter
Okay.
for 6 years. This is how long it took me to do what's supposed to be a 2 year full time master's program. And then, like, right when I graduated, like 2 months later, after I graduated from my master's degree, we moved to Scotland and I started my PhD in theology because, yeah, it was just, and none of it was practical. None of it was like, I want this degree so I could do this job. I'm like, I don't know what jobs you can do
Wow.
with this. I just really want to learn this stuff. Jobs will figure themselves out. Um, and I can thank my parents for the
Mm.
college part of it.
Okay.
They
Yeah.
had, college funds set aside for me that was able to pay for my undergrad. I paid my own way through my master's degree
Okay.
because I only took one class at a time. So I would
Got it.
teach summer school at Monte Vista, and that money would
Okay.
pay for the next years, like, the 3 or 4 classes I
Yeah.
would take. So doing it slow paid off because I was able to pay for it in real time.
Mm.
Um, and then, I'm coming up on my 10-year uh, uh, public service loan forgiveness thing for my
Wow.
PhD because I took some
Congrats.
loans to pay for my PhD. But yeah, it like March or April is 10 years, and I get to
Congrats.
apply. We'll see. Like, I know there's an application process for the loan forgiveness, but name a praise for that. Yeah.
Besides Napster, the business major, and then going to Scotland, was there a pivotal moment in your life that shaped you to who you are right now? And it doesn't have to be one big moment, but if you know of one, please share.
Mm. I mean, like, I think the reality is there are lots of pivotal moments in
Mm.
my life. One of them was definitely like, I know this is probably kind of a common story, but it was Human Lake, the summer
Mm.
before my freshman year of high school. I had grown up in a Christian home, but going to Hume Lake
Huh.
that summer was definitely like, I'm not just in a Christian family. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a Christian.
Huh.
Like, faith kind of transferred from like, I'm a Christian because my parents take me to
Yeah.
church every week, to like, no, I want to take my relationship with God seriously. That's why I would say, like, I began um, developing some of the spiritual disciplines. So I started praying and reading
Mm.
scripture regularly. Um, yeah, so that was definitely a pivotal moment. I was like 13. Um, Another one happened like in the middle of my master's degree, um, where I would say, and I totally remember this happening. Uh, you can do a lot of school online now. Back when I was doing my master's degree, there weren't any online classes, but out of I think it was 24 total classes you had to take for this master's
Mm.
degree, you were allowed to take up to 4 in distance learning.
Mm.
And they would mail you, for the first 2 classes I did, a like a folder full of cassettes, and there was lectures on cassette. you'd have to listen to, and then you take your notes and you write your papers and
Yeah.
you send them down. And I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Monte Vista Christian School where I was teaching. I think I was on my way to a football game.
Mm.
Um, and I seem to just remember like the lecture was almost over, so I'm like, I'm just gonna sit in my car. I have some time. I'm just gonna finish the lecture here. And so I need to back up one moment. This was about the same time that the Passion of the Christ
Oh,
was
okay.
in movie theaters,
Okay.
and that was like a major thing among our church. Like everybody was going, have you gone to see it yet?
Yeah.
Our churches were buying out screenings of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And and I didn't go right away. I think I went like after he'd been playing for 2 weeks or so.
Mm.
But friends who had gone to see it already, they're like, I just broke down. I was just weeping. They had such emotional experiences seeing that movie. And I went to see it. I couldn't get anybody to go see it with me. My wife was like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
see that. It
Yeah.
just look, it's so
Yeah.
bloody.
Yeah.
And all my friends had already seen it. I just couldn't get anybody to go with me. So I'm like, I'll just go by myself. So I went and saw the movie by myself, and I had no emotional reaction.
Mm.
I just watched the movie,
Yeah.
and like I know the story, interesting, like a couple creative choices Mel
Yeah.
Gibson had made, and I was just like, I was really graphic.
Yeah.
And when it was over, I just had no emotional response, and I really had to I'm like, okay, why is everybody having an emotional response to this, and I'm not?
Hmm.
And there's probably multiple reasons to that, but one thing I kind of realized was like, okay, I think I have a problem somewhere deep in my theology,
Hmm.
which is that when I think about what Jesus endured on the cross, I'm thankful for it, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He didn't have to do it. But there's still a sense where I'm like, okay, if I went through that,
Mm.
or anybody else is just sort of like a regular person, that would be agonizing. It would be
Yeah.
awful. And I'm sure in some steps that's true for Jesus, but he's God.
Yeah.
It couldn't be, it couldn't have been that bad. He's God.
Hmm.
He can, he can take it.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
that was sort of holding me up.
Mm.
And um, I was listening to this lecture on tape, and it was like, yeah, it was within the following, I don't know, week or so of that, because that was still like very much in my head. And the professor, his name was Ray Anderson, who has since passed away. But he was specifically talking about the moment where was Simon of Cyrene has to like carry Christ's cross.
Mm.
Um, and he paused there and pressed like exactly on what I was dealing with. He's like, notice this.
Mm.
Christ is not teaching a lesson here. This is not a parable. He is actually crumbling under these bucklings, under the weight of that cross, so that somebody else has to carry it for him. And he like just spoke. I feel like he was just talking right to me, even though it was a lecture on tape. I had never talked to him, but he's like, for some of you, you know, yes, Jesus is God that became a man, but maybe in your thinking, he didn't really become a man
Mm.
in the way that that moment is real, that he is in agony and he is physically broken. And, the gospel is that God took on that reality for our sakes, but oftentimes mentally, we're not letting it be true that he
Yeah.
really took that reality on. And I was like, oh, that's exactly right.
Mm.
And I forget, some of the wording I forget, but he was just
Yeah.
so able to press the real
Wow.
humanity of Christ in a way that just flooded me. And I was crying sitting in my car listening to this tape. I had not been able to get emotional watching this movie, but
But
listening to this somewhat cerebral seminary lecture, I just totally broke down. And I think of that as a turning point because I realized, and especially in some of the theological study I was doing at that time and continued to go on to do, I was realizing I let um, I let Jesus, the story of Jesus, tell me about what salvation is, but I'm not adequately letting the story of Jesus tell me who God is
hmm.
and who and what I am.
Mm.
And realizing that I was kind of telling Jesus who he had to be because I know what God is, right? So, like, Jesus, if you're God, then you can suffer and it doesn't hurt, or something like that. And he is like, no, no, no. Like, let this story rewrite all the things you think you might know about God and humanity. And so that really kind of was a turning point in a journey I was already committed to doing theology. I already knew I loved
Yeah,
theology, but
yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
say that was a turning point in my theology. Like I started thinking about theology very different from that point forward. Um, and realizing theology has to be done, it has to be started over from Jesus.
Mm.
It's the whole like the new wine that needs new
Yeah,
wineskins. You
yeah,
can't
yeah.
use your
The
old
old
wineskins.
ones,
Like I'm
yeah.
like, okay, I think I know what he's talking about here. Like I'm using some old wineskins,
Wow.
and it's totally spilling the wine everywhere. Um, so that was very much a turning point. It also just on like the um, Ray Anderson was a student of a guy named T.F. Torrance. He had done his own Ph.D. in
Mm,
Scotland under T.F. Torrance, and T.F. Torrance had been probably the most prominent English student of Karl Barth.
mm.
I was unaware of any of that kind of school of theology, but I'm like, I want to know about this kind of
Mm,
theology. So, yeah, I started turning to reading some of Karl Barth's work, and I ended up doing my own PhD dissertation on T.F. Torrance.
mm.
Um, and ended up, reading a lot of Anderson's stuff. And yeah, so it reshaped not only kind of how I think about God, it also set me on a path in terms of
Yeah.
like the kinds of influences in theology I started gravitating toward. Definitely
Uh,
turning.
I don't. S- you you're not shy from conversation topics, right? And so, and especially since we live in Silicon Valley, I mean, in you're in Santa Cruz too. Um, we're very transparent, and we're just encountering. And I see you present a self safe space, but as you encounter something that's new, um, how do you determine what is true
Oh,
when there's so many different facets to everything?
man,
What's your process
that's
like?
that's a great question, and especially as I'm getting older, in the way like because what's funny is like we deal with teenagers.
Yeah.
I have been teaching teenagers primarily for like most of my career. But what a teenager is always changing, right? Like
Yeah.
I know some kid as a teenager and I get to know the way they think. And
Mm,
like, I have some relationships still with students I was
yeah.
teaching back in 2004, 2005,
Yeah.
but they're now in their 30s.
Yeah.
And their way of thinking about the world has not changed all that much.
Mm,
But when every year you're getting new 15-year-olds,
yeah.
that way that they think is just constantly changing. And the older I get, the slower I find myself being able to respond, and like the less agile and yeah, the more clumsy I
Mm,
feel in responding to the ways teenagers look at the world. The harder it is not to just be totally out of touch. When I
yeah.
was teaching at 23, 24, I was like the cool teacher. Like I got it. I didn't have to stretch anything. I
Yeah.
already knew the music. I knew the cool music before they did. Um, and now that is just so not true. Um, so all that to say, my process with like determining what's true in context, they're always changing, is increasingly to just really try to remind myself to go slow,
Mm,
not make snap judgments, not be dismissive too quickly. Again, I know that sometimes I can be
mm,
dismissive. My own children are helpful checks on that, and they're pretty honest with me. They'll tell me, they're like, you're not taking this seriously enough.
mm.
You're being too quick to dismiss that. I'm like, okay, if I it, and I like my
Wow.
kids they're mature, they're wise.
Yeah.
When they tell me that, I listen. I'm like, all
Okay.
right, you're right. Let me slow down. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, that's a big part of it. Um, I one thing I think I developed within the community of my doctoral studies, because it was a rich community.
Mm,
Uh, the guys I got to know out in Aberdeen, Scotland, between 2009 and 2011. That was an incredible time in my life. And one thing that we as a community really cared about was
mm.
detecting and dismantling false dichotomies.
Huh. Huh.
When people
Wow.
are just really quick with are you this or that? Like we as a community are
Yeah.
always like, hold on, why is it only those two? And it can't keep up. You
Wow.
know, um,
Mm,
And that is definitely a major part of my process. It's something that I try to develop with students as well. Oftentimes, I will intentionally present a false dichotomy and see if they smell it.
mm,
Um, and usually, a quick hit will be like, "Wait, why? Why? Why
uh,
is it one or the other there?" And so, yeah, in determining what's true right now, when I see somebody coming with a big claim, and they're like, "This is, the thing." If they're super loud, if they demand that you pick a team because we're at war, um, and uh, uh, it's an us or them. It's an
yeah.
either or it's an or. I don't dismiss the fact that sometimes that's true.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sometimes there really is a good versus evil situation.
Mm, yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, but I usually start with a slow, even I'm very slow to even determine that that's the situation.
Mm,
More
mm,
often, I'm like, there's probably more to this.
mm,
There's probably more than the two sides you're presenting. Um, I think it's important as a believer, as a Christian,
mm,
to resist confusing the kingdom of God with any particular um, platform, program,
mm,
slogan, social movement that's going on. I'm always like,
mm, yeah.
yeah, there might be some overlap there. And yes, my commitment to the kingdom very well might mean that I want to align with you in like fighting this good fight.
Mm,
Yes. I don't want to be so um, resistant to join a cause that I'm like, nope,
yeah.
like it's kingdom of God over here, and then just let the world sort of go by.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
you got to engage. You've got to um, you've got to speak the truth in the hard situations within the concrete
Mm,
situations we face. I just find very often Christians are just too quick to like not only commit themselves to a particular fight, but to like assume
yeah.
that following Christ means aligning with this
Mm,
team,
yeah.
and to the point where um, aligning with this team means I viciously critique the enemies and I acknowledge no faults on my team, and I just like that's not the kingdom of God. That's not how the kingdom of God works. We, the way of Christ is to be much quicker to critique ourselves,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm. Yeah.
and less to to throw stones.
What does the future of theology look like right now? What
That
was
was a
the,
question. That was a question friends started asking me when I was still doing my doctorate, and I was always like, I'm still trying to catch up on where theology was in like the 1930s and 40s. It like I still find what was going on in that era so explosive.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
catch
yeah,
up to where theology was almost 100 years ago.
yeah.
Where's it going? I have no idea. But I want to say, hmm, I do find that I'm like, having that preamble, I do find that I have something to say.
Mm,
Um, I think theology must always be in the business of going back.
mm,
Um, not for the sake of rewinding the calendar. Like
yeah,
we can't actually travel back in time and make the world the way the world was in some earlier time.
mm,
But theology, as like the task of studying the Word of God along with the Word of the Church, like listening to what the Scripture says, listening to what the Church says, and see, do these two align?
yeah,
Because they don't always. Quite often, we
yeah,
find
yeah, yeah, yeah,
ourselves as a community of believers going out of the world and preaching a gospel that we're kind of making up along the way. And you look back at the Bible, it's like, how did you get that from there? That's not there at all. And
mm,
so that's what I think theology's primary task is. It's testing the church's God talk against
mm,
the word of God in scripture and making sure that we're still being faithful to it. So we're always going back, and we're not just going back to scripture.
yeah,
I think we go back to those moments of the history of the church um, that were most pivotal
yeah,
for our family here, global family going back 2,000 well, plus years really,
hmm,
because the people of of Abraham are our spiritual descendants as well, or ancestors, spiritual ancestors. So theology, I think, always needs to be looking back, especially finding those moments in church history where there was like a special new clarity.
Mm.
So, the early councils of the church talking
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
Trinity, the Reformation talking about the authority of Scripture and the way salvation works. Um, I do like, to me, what was going on in the 1930s and
Mm.
or really 20s, 30s, 40s within theology as the church was dealing with National Socialism
Yep.
and things like this. Karl Barth was, a part of the resistance movement in Switzerland and Germany against the Nazis.
Wow.
He helped write what was called the Barmen Declaration, which was a stance against the German Christians, which were these churches that signed on. I
Wow.
mean, really, in World War One, they had signed on with Kaiser Wilhelm's war policies. They had said, like, yes, this is the will of God. And then that there were Christian churches. Oftentimes people say Hitler was a Christian. Little evidence of that, but there were Christian leaders
Yeah.
that saw Hitler as like their man, like God's man, and were and so to me, like you look back to those times and you see like, okay, what is there for us to learn now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's like, where's theology going? Um, it needs to, it needs to look at what's going on in the world and
Yeah.
hear where things, we need to remind ourselves that there really is nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think theology's place among the academic
Yeah.
disciplines is to, not to stand in the way of
Yeah.
the advancement of science, technology, and progress, but in the midst of our societal, pushes forward,
Yeah.
to just remind those conversations like there really is nothing new under the sun,
Amen.
and there's a gospel and a wisdom of God that it is not changing with the
Mm.
times,
Yeah.
and actually has a power to meet us in our changing times. That doesn't inoculate us from the change. Like the world is changing, and
Mm.
we change with it. But there is this concurrence of like of stability with evolution or whatever you want to call it. It's not either or. That's a false dichotomy. Progress and tradition.
Well,
You know,
well, I
people ask,
like.
"Are you conservative or are you progressive?" I'm like, "Why is it one or the other? Why can't I, recognize tradition and want to see us move forward as people?"
Ooh, amen. I mean, well, here's things like we haven't discovered everything and we haven't read everything. And I like having those aha moments where I remember undergrad getting excited in US literature class, learning about John Woolman, a Quaker,
Mm.
that made his own clothes because he was one of the first and earliest abolitionists as a Quaker. And he's like, no, like I'm protesting slavery. I'm not forcing you to, but I'm protesting it,
Mm.
and he kept these great journal writings. And then only a few years ago, I don't know, it's because of conversations with you or Dr. Stiles and Greg Larson, but something came up. Siri picked it up, all right? And a suggested video that came up on YouTube about this guy named Bonhoeffer. And I've only heard about Bonhoeffer 3 years ago because it's just not in my vocabulary. So, but when I hear stories about how, he goes to America and he has fellowship with Black Christians there, the Black church, and I'm like, where's this narrative?
Yeah, and I mean, he is. I mean, not only should he be a recognized like saint within the church,
Mm,
evangelical, like Protestants don't really do saints, but
yeah, yeah.
you kind of should. Um, like he at
Yeah.
least his name should be as well known as Billy Graham.
Mm.
Um, but he also like his theology, like it was, um, it's been radical. Like he has been debated quite a bit in what
Oh,
he
okay.
meant, especially in his letters and papers from prison,
Hmm.
because he wrote a lot while he had participated in the smuggling of Jews out of Switzerland, and famously he was a part of like the suitcase bomb assassination attempt on Hitler,
Oh,
which failed,
wow.
and he was never caught for that. That's not why he was imprisoned, but he could
Wow.
have been. But yeah, I mean his writings on those things are the raw.
Mm.
and powerful. Yeah. But yeah, Bonhoeffer's, again, I'm just trying to keep up. I'm trying to catch up to Bonhoeffer, who died in the 40s. And it's like,
Oh man.
where's it going? Hopefully we'll catch up to Bonhoeffer.
How do you handle failures, setbacks, stumbling blocks, and how have you learned to turn them into stepping stones?
I think, like in my life, uh, there was really one
Mm.
very big, like, thing that felt like a massive failure.
Mm.
It happened only like a year before you and I met.
Huh.
Um, where again, I went to school not knowing what I would do with it. I
Yeah.
just knew I wanted to study theology. And I will say I did it because I thought, like, the church needs more people with this education.
Wow.
Because I went looking for this kind of stuff at church and
Wow.
nobody wanted to or knew how to
Wow.
talk about any of this stuff.
Wow.
So I went, there's a sense in which, I mean, a lot of us, when I was doing my PhD, a lot of us shared a narrative of, like, we went to seminary
Mm.
as an attempt to see if we could stay Christians. Because, like, our life at church was becoming a crisis, because while the church community was feeding our moral development and our like emotional kind of connection with
Yeah.
God, it was absolutely standing in the way of our intellectual development. It
Mm.
seemed like actively against us developing our critical thinking within our faith. Um, so I became convinced that going to seminary would be a way I could serve the church community. That didn't mean I necessarily wanted to work at church.
Mm.
I
Wow.
wasn't sure how it was going to work out in terms of, like, how I was going to pay my bills. I didn't go to college with that narrative that I know a lot of our students have. You go to college so you can get a good job.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm going to college to be educated so that I can, like, contribute to my community in a way that I feel like it needs contribution. And theological education, I'm like, they just don't seem to have it. Even the pastors that went to seminary, when I asked them stuff about it, they're like, yeah, we studied that in seminary at one point, but I forget what the professor
Wow.
said. I've got a folder somewhere where I wrote something down, but who cares? I'm like, I care. So yeah, I had gone to seminary to, like, see if I could stay a Christian, and
Mm.
God met me there. And again, like I say, when I was doing my PhD, a ton of us had that shared story. So coming out of seminary, it's like, oh, now I've got some debt from the PhD, and I better go get a job. And, like, the primary reason you do a PhD is to teach in higher ed.
Yeah.
I will say there were enough responsible, caring, loving people in my life who told me, um, you are going to find it very difficult
Mm.
to get a job in theological higher education. So I didn't go in with blinders on. I knew that that was a long shot. I mean, the reality is that, like, it is difficult to land a job. Uh, it was difficult then,
Mm.
like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
being, like, a white male, because I think rightfully a lot of Bible colleges and seminaries were waking up to the fact that their faculties were exclusively white men.
Okay.
And that gave them a very kind of narrowed
Yeah.
theological perspective. So they were intentionally doing what are sometimes called diversity hires.
Okay.
And I don't think that's necessarily a bad word.
Yeah.
I think that those schools needed to be doing that.
Mm.
That didn't mean they were hiring people. Like, a diversity hire doesn't mean, like, oh, they weren't qualified. No, they were
No, yeah.
hiring qualified people.
Yeah.
These were people that had PhDs, that had
Yeah.
training. But yes, part of the consideration was you represent an unrepresented
Yeah.
voice, and we were realizing that we need that.
Yeah.
So as I came to terms with the fact that that was going on, I was like, all right, that's, like, a good reason for
Mm.
me not to be able to get one of these jobs. I was
Yeah.
actually blown away that I ended up getting so close.
Mm.
I got, brought to campus, like, the final stage of interviews,
Yeah.
3 times, which is torture. Like, to get that close to a job. And the one in Kansas, I'm pretty sure I only lost because the guy that got the job, like, our publishing track record, our
Mm.
scholarly track was identical.
Oh,
But
okay.
I had kids, Like I had a son who was going into high school.
Yeah.
He had one child that was an infant, and that was
Uh,
smart. Because they like I told my wife, I'm like, if I take this job, I swear, from the moment we get out there, I'll start looking for a different one. But it's better if you're already a college professor, you're way more hireable
yeah.
as a college professor.
Yeah.
And I could have like climbed the ladder or
Yeah.
something. Whereas that guy was much less
Yeah.
likely to do that. They
Yep.
were going to
Yep.
go there,
Yep.
set down
Yep.
roots.
Yep. Yep.
Like that was going to be the place that they planted. So I think that's probably why I lost that job. He was a white male. I was like, wait, I lost the job to another white male? How is that? Like, that's crazy. Anyway, so sorry, I got sidetracked there. So as I was dealing with that, I'm like, okay, so like I'm going to apply for those jobs, but knowing I'm probably not going to get one, how else? Like, what can I do with this education? And I turned to the church I had grown up at. I wasn't sure it would work, but I was like, wait, do you like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Like, this is my passion. I want to serve the church in doing all of the things that are involved in kingdom ministry, but with a special emphasis on like training disciples in their, their study of scripture, training leaders and that kind of thing. And they were like, yeah, we could try that. And the need they had at the time was for like a young adults pastor.
Okay.
So I took that role, and it just worked out disastrously. It was absolutely like it was 4 years of subtle like suffering. No one was super mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one, like it was just trying to fit into a context where I'm like, I didn't fully understand what my job was. I didn't really understand why we had that.
Yeah.
Like, why does this church need, like, because what young adults meant in that church context was like they're out of college, but they're not quite an adult. I'm like, what's that? Like, why are we encouraging this delayed adulthood? Like, why aren't they just part of the church once they're so I had a job I didn't believe in, which is my fault.
Yeah.
I took it. I was desperate just to like get a job.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
took
yeah.
it because that's what they were offering me. And the stuff, about like, yeah, we'll kind of incorporate like theological things in. No, they had no interest. So I ended up just being uh, like, but you're always so polite. You can never sound negative because that's not becoming. So it was always these very like smile on your face, put everything positively, try to address the things that you see as a problem, and then like just very quickly it had all fallen apart. Sorry, that was a long. Your question was, how do I deal with failures? And that's sort of me describing the failure itself. Maybe framing it that way too. I will say that I knew they weren't looking for that. I went into the job knowing they want me to be this young adult pastor, but I feel like I know what they actually need, and I think I can sell them. I went in with this cocky, like, I think I can convince them that like if we were to develop a culture here among the people that are volunteering in the junior high group and the high school group, if I can get them involved in like reading some deeper things, it's going to create a passion. It's going to steamroll, and they did let me do a couple things. I got to have like interns, like they had an internship program, and they let me have the interns once a week, and I was able to like assign them books and like so I tried a couple of things, and it didn't work. I had to come to terms with the fact that like the foundations of the culture of the church I had grown up in depend on people not growing in their theology.
Wow.
It's kind of part of the DNA.
Wow.
And I like finding that out, and finding out that like my big program of like making this happen. I was just so sure of myself that I was going to be able to carve out a job that didn't already exist, which is a dangerous thing. When you go to an institution that's not hiring for a job, but you're like, let me convince you that you need a position you don't have. I didn't realize what a bad idea that was. So yeah, how I dealt with that in the aftermath of it is number one. Yeah, this is funny. This applies to maybe like most of the things that I would call failures in my life. I think it's important that we learn to tell our stories well, which means that we actively engage, like narrating. our own lives, having people in our lives that are patient with us, that can do that with us, that are like, I just gotta like, here's what I think happened. And then just be ready to constantly revise that story.
Yeah.
Because very often, yeah, I thought I had a handle on, like, here's
Yeah.
where God's been bringing me. He took me through this and through this so I could do this. And then when the thing I thought was the point of it all blew up on me, I'm like, uh-oh. Yeah, I need to retell that story. I'll even say the idea that I need to retell the story was a lesson I learned along the way. Because what it felt like in the moment was the story wasn't real. There was no story. There's no
Mm.
story. There's no storyteller. It's all it's all a big nothing. Was the way it feels when you think you get where things are going, and the rug gets pulled out from under you. You doubt that your life has any particular like
Um,
narrative,
yeah.
satisfying narrative arc. But what you really need to do is sort of like back up and be like, you haven't caught the real story yet. You know, if your story is unsatisfying in
Mm.
the current moment, that means you haven't hit the climax. You haven't really reached the end of that road. So learning that, and
Mm.
and continuing to practice like let me try a different spin
Mm.
on where I think God's been taking me, and where this is all going. Yeah, I think it's both of those things are necessary. The practice of narrating, but then an openness.
Mm.
Like when you think you've got it, when you think like that's great. If you find
Yeah.
like inspiration from like, whoa, here's where I think God's been bringing me.
Yeah.
That's important to draw. I think to be thankful to God, for when you get that glimpse of what He's doing. I don't want to be overly. I don't want to say like you never actually know. No, sometimes you can see like, no, you really brought me here, and this is powerful, and thank you.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we do have to kind of hold those narratives a little loosely, especially as we look forward. If we think that like starting the arc at this point means I know what's going to happen next,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with like having a little bit of vision for the future and be like, I think this is where
Yeah.
this is going, and I'm going to adjust my sails and my compass accordingly. I don't think that's wrong. You just have to do it in a way that's like hold it somewhat loosely.
Yeah.
And if the whole thing, if the winds change and everything sort of falls apart, don't give up on the idea that God's telling a story. Just be
Yeah.
ready to kind of revise your understanding of it.
Yeah. I was talking about that with my students a couple weeks back. Well, I think it was before Christmas break. Talking about there's a difference between, I mean, as you're growing, and you're being, learning how to become critical thinkers, there's a difference between perception and perspective. But we're living in reality though. There is an absolute reality,
Yes.
you know. Um, but there's some perspectives that we're just not, I'm not saying we're not ready to handle, we just don't have a grasp on yet.
Yeah.
Or what's scary is we're not allowed into other people's perspectives or the other
Mm,
sides, and
yeah.
there's the legendary man behind the curtain.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's a powerful insight. Like there is an absolute, but we never understand it absolutely.
Yeah.
We always have a limited perspective on it.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who is interested? Maybe I'm projecting, who's interested in studying theology at the grad school level?
Oh man. Um, gosh. I it's like I'm thinking about this like I've never been asked this question. Of course, like I have these conversations a lot. Um, I would say to me, there's kind of a list of things I want to say. Number
Yeah.
one, like awesome. Like no matter what I say and how you feel at the end of this conversation, take the next step. Go talk to like an admissions counselor. Start looking at what's possible. Like yes. Um, be be aware of why.
Mm, okay.
Like do you want to go to seminary or like divinity school? Having just introduced that distinction, now I feel the need to like clarify what that is. A seminary is a
Okay. Yeah.
school that exists by itself that offers master's degrees in biblical studies
Okay.
or theology. A divinity school is a school within a larger university. That does the same
Okay.
thing as a seminary, but it doesn't exist independently. It exists
Okay.
within a university. Anyway, sorry. But you'll get the same kind of education at either one.
Okay.
And those exist primarily for training professional ministers. So, like, if that's something you think you want to do, then yes, go to seminary. Because actually, in today's climate, there are a lot of churches that will hire people for professional ministry jobs with no seminary
Yeah.
training, and that is a tragedy. I mean, I don't want to make anybody sound, or I don't know that anybody would be listening to this that is in that position, that
Yeah.
is currently a pastor that
Yeah.
has no seminary training. I don't want to like shame them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to encourage them to like talk to your board or your senior pastor,
Yeah.
or like see like, is there a way we could maybe adjust my job for a few years so I could do seminary
Yeah.
while I'm doing this. I have a lot of students I've taught at because beyond Valley, I also do teach seminary at Western Seminary and Regent University's School of Divinity. And I get a lot of students in that situation, and I'm so thankful for them. I'm like, thank you for caring enough. Even though you already had the paycheck, you're already employed. Some of them maybe are being offered salary
Yeah.
raises if they get their master's degree, but some of them aren't.
Yeah.
They're just doing it because they recognize they should be doing it. So yes, if that's what you're thinking, do it. For those who I was one of, I was like, I'm not doing this to be a professional minister.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because I just really need to learn this stuff, and it's not being offered anywhere else
Anywhere
I can
else?
get it.
Yeah.
I want to say make sure that's true,
Mm.
because like some churches I think are hearing that, they're paying attention. Talk to your pastor,
Okay.
find out their seminary education, let them know your own interests, and see like could the kind of thing you want happen at your church, because it should.
Mm.
At least on some level. Like I'm a part of a church that's fairly small.
Yeah.
I think we're like somewhere about 150 people, and we don't have like seminary level offerings.
Yeah.
But once a year, uh, they let me do like a 1 month theology deep dive.
Wow.
And I that shouldn't be satisfying. Like that, to like what you're talking about, like that's not going to be enough.
But
But in other churches,
yeah.
there might be
Yeah.
more than
Yeah.
that, and that could at least be a starting point. So, like, because I just really want to see that kind of thing happen
Yeah.
in churches more. Because I mean, it should.
Yeah.
Um, it's just it's just hard to find enough interest. That was why the church I worked at, they were like, that sounds great, but um, if nobody shows up, doesn't
Mm.
matter how good it sounds.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So yeah, then after that, I'm like, yeah, if you just find yourself, yeah, there's nowhere else you can get this training. It's very much worth talking to the seminaries and see like they sometimes have certificate programs.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes
Okay.
they'll just let you audit the class, which is way more affordable.
Yo.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
and then you're still able to go to all the lectures, and I have audit students that still do all the assignments. Um, they're not paying me to grade them, but I'll still give them a scan. I'm like, yeah,
Mm.
that looks pretty good. Um, but I just want to sort of say, I mean, seminary is going to be tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just got to count the cost. For me, I think it was absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty individual thing. Like if you were asking me about PhDs, because that's what people ask me a lot. I'll get my grad school students asking me like, I don't want to do a
Yeah.
PhD.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
your advice? I'm like, probably don't do it, but not
Yeah.
necessarily. Like, let's talk, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
let's kind of see. Do you have like a really rich uncle or something? Like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. Yeah.
totally financially independent, yeah, do
Yeah.
whatever you want. But
How are you balancing your work life and personal life? So work full time on top of being a professor at Regent and Western. Um, what are you doing? What do you have vacations? What do you do?
yeah, that's a great question. Um, Number one, I just absolutely marvel at any teacher that's just only a teacher. I'm like, that's all you do? Because to me, like being a teacher is like it is taxing on our time, and English teachers especially. God bless you. I feel like your workload is of a different kind, and I'm glad the school because it's a recent thing that they've taken one prep period,
Yeah, that's what I
or they
heard.
give
Yeah,
you an
yeah,
extra prep period, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm glad they've done that because that's legit for English teachers. Yeah, absolutely. Um, but yeah, to me, still, like, we get our summers off, we get all this vacation time, and like our our work day ends at like 3 o'clock.
yeah,
That's amazing. So like compared to other jobs I've had,
yeah.
work life balance, when it gets out of balance, it's entirely like,
Mm, yeah,
because if teaching is the only like basic work you're doing, um, I would think work life balance shouldn't be that difficult to achieve. But I think almost everybody we work with, there's a few other things going on.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I will say for me, this is something I felt for a long time, but it's been nice hearing like Steve Dang has said this, um, that people oftentimes are looking for a balance as like a stasis. Like at every moment you've achieved the kind of thing that you're always in balance. I don't even aim at that. For yeah, for me, I'm like my wife is quicker to sort of be like, this is crazy. You've gotten too busy. But my response is always like, yeah, it's crazy busy right now. But I just kind of look at the calendar. But I'm like, look, we're like 2 weeks away from this thing I'm doing being over. Um, and like I get like a week off. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
always kind of it's seasons. I
Mm,
go through seasons of just being crazy busy. And I will say last semester was one of them. Fall of 2023 was crazy busy for me. I was teaching 3 online classes outside of Valley, which meant and they were big. Like I always had a pile of like 12 to 15 page papers, and it'd be like 25 to 30 of them. So there was never a time where I could do nothing and be like, there's nothing I should be doing. There was always a bunch of stuff I should be doing. Plus, too bad Eugene was recording an
yeah,
album.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And my dad is still doing music, and my brother and I and my kids
Yeah.
all do some of that with him. And we had several concerts going on in the fall that we were rehearsing for, and it was just crazy. But I endured it with some I was constantly negotiating. I'm like, okay, because it's so busy right now. When somebody asks me to do this, like in January, I'm saying no.
Yeah.
So like, and I'm reaping the rewards of that right now.
Okay.
Like this month and next month, I'm mellow. And I've known that for like 6 months. I knew that it was going to be crazy, 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 mellow, mellow, mellow. Um, and so yeah, I'm pretty good at like kicking my feet up when the work slows down. I make sure I carve out time where it's gonna. And that, yeah, over Christmas break, we didn't plan any big trips. My wife and I, like, we both got sick, but once we were about not sick,
Yeah.
we took bike rides,
Yeah,
we
it's
took
awesome.
sunset walks. I'm reading through the Narnia books right now. This past weekend, we had a 3-day weekend. I read like 100 pages a day. Each of those, which I am not normally. I don't normally read that much, but it was like, and I was doing house chores and stuff. But
Mhm.
when things were mellow, I'd let my dog sit on my lap, kick up the easy chair, and take it easy. I'm good at working hard. I'm good at resting. It's just sort of those different seasons, and I always have an eye on like a look at like 6 months, maybe even a year at a time,
Okay.
and make sure that like, okay, there's going to be a busy season, but I'll do the same thing. I'm like, if I look at like, here's like 4 or 5 months with nothing going on.
Yeah.
All right, maybe I should ramp up uh, some stuff. And it's always this. Too bad, Eugene. Like if there's nothing going on, I'm like, I'm gonna ramp that up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Besides the Bible and the current Narnia books, what's a book that's really impacted you?
Mm, that's a great question. So many. Um, Connected to my story earlier about the lecture on tape from Ray
Hmm.
Anderson. Um, a book by T.F. Torrance called The Mediation of Christ.
Mm.
Um, that was a book. I don't even think it was assigned for the class. I think he just recommended it.
Mm.
Um, and he
Wow.
pressed it as like a pivotal book for himself. The professor did.
Yeah.
And for a theology book, it's kind of shorter. It is dense. I won't say it's an
Yeah.
easy read. It doesn't have like a lot of footnotes or anything, but yeah, it really pressed that idea that my relationship with God is not just possible because of what Christ did in the past. It is being ongoingly actively mediated by Christ. Christ is my mediator with the Father,
Mm.
which doesn't mean he stands as a barrier between me and the Father. Once you've got your doctrine of the Trinity going, you
Yeah.
see that like Christ is in the Father and the Father is in
Yeah.
the person of the Son. So the Son mediating between me and the Father is actually my total unity with the Father,
Mm.
because he is in me and I am in him, and he is in the Father and the Father is in him. So the Father and I meet in that mediation. And the way Torrance just the way he draws that out, it just absolutely reshape. It was a part of the same thing. It was kind of like
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
conjunction
Yeah.
with the Ray Anderson class I was taking. That I was like, okay, I just got to start over. And it's why, it's something I've been thinking a lot about this year.
Oh.
Because I start the class I teach at Valley every year with a lesson on the Trinity, and it's very thick. It's very dense
Mm.
historically and conceptually. And in my head, I've been like, I think that's a fun idea. Let's start the class as challenging as it's ever going to be, and then it'll go downhill from there, and it'll get easier. And I tell the students that, but still, I get these deer in the headlights looks, and they're like, "This class is not for me. This is too gnarly." So I'm like, I probably need to back that off in future years. But I'm like, I still want to talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the the fact that Trinity is not this weird like logic puzzle. Like, how can
Huh.
three be one and one be three?
Yeah.
No, Trinity is like the shape of my relationship to God. It's not just God's
Wow.
in heaven and I'm on earth, and I'm like receiving His word and hopefully obeying it. It's the Father in heaven who has sent His Son on earth to be what I am in my place
Mm.
in order to make me what He is
Wow.
in my unity with him. So he's taken my place as like sinner under the curse of the law, so that I can take his place as like beloved, righteous son of the Father. And the Father and Son have then poured out their Spirit on me, which binds me to Christ through faith. He enables my faith. He completes my unity with Him. I mean, the Spirit put Christ
Yeah.
in the womb of Mary, brought Christ out of the empty tomb, and it's that same Spirit that works in me to make my unity with Christ, and thereby like reconcile me to the Father. So that my whole, it's not just that I pray in Jesus' name. My
Yeah.
whole relationship with God is in the name of Christ and the power of the Spirit. Um, and just that way of thinking about who God is and how I relate to Him, like that, the more I went into
Yeah.
Torrance and into Bart, the more I was like, wow,
Wow.
this changes everything. And I've been a Christian my
Yeah.
whole life.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just did never really. I'm like, yeah, Jesus died, so I, go to heaven. But I hadn't got all of that.
Yeah.
Christ in me, me in
Yeah.
Christ, the Spirit, all that.
No, that is more engaging when you put into those words that the practice is in itself is what makes it concrete.
Yeah, yeah. Our life with God has a Trinitarian shape to it. It's why, I mean, man, one of the things I bang on about, and I get nowhere with people on this, is why do people end their prayers in your name, amen?
Yeah.
And I pressed that, like I did a faculty thing on that once,
Yeah.
and I had a few people be like, "Yeah, you're right,"
Yeah.
and then I've still heard those same people pray in your name, amen, like
I
over and
know.
over again. I'm
I
like,
know. I
why?
know.
Why?
I know.
Like, what does that even mean? I don't think that God necessarily like won't hear the prayer because he didn't,
Yeah.
check the form right and say the right ending. It's to me like the fact that we end our prayers in Jesus'
His name.
name
Yeah.
is just this reminder for us
Mm.
that I'm not just approaching the throne of
Yeah.
the Father
Yeah.
under my own, you know,
Yeah.
under my own power, under my own steam. Like I'm able to come there and received as like a
Yeah.
child who the Father is proud of and is like considers righteous because I come in His name. He lived His life before the Father in my name, right? He prayed in John 17. He prayed for all of those that would come. He was praying for me. He was praying for us. Like he lives his life. He prayed in my name, so I pray in his name. And I, like that little tag at the end of the prayer has the power to remind us of that Trinitarian shape, and we just kind of throw it away
Um,
because of this kind
yeah.
of like I call it like Trinitarian collapse, right? It's like, well, I mean, like I'm praying to God, and Jesus is God, so I'm
Yeah.
praying to Jesus. So in your name, I'm like, Jesus. I mean, it's not wrong. Jesus is God, so there's a sense in which we're praying to Him. But He
Ah,
teaches us to pray, "Our Father, who art in heaven." Like, no, I'm praying to the Father in the name of the Son, by the power of the Spirit. Like, there's reasons to be consciously mindful of that.
what
So yeah, the
you
question
just
was a book that changed my life, and
no no
I go,
no
I'm
no
done.
no no you said the mediation of Christ.
The mediation of Christ, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you
sure.
break it's a process. It's a process. But when you said that, I had a big flashback of when my mother and myself first came to America, and we split from my father, and she made us pray, and she would make me follow her in Korean, but at the end she said in Jesus' name. I mean, now it's like it all ties together because that's the thing that binds us,
Mm,
despite the language. And she made sure to say, no, this is what you say. And
yeah,
as I live now without her, looking at her relationship with Christ, I was like, oh, this means everything for someone who is abandoned, right? Has
yeah,
right been displaced, has been looked down upon, um, and through this one, no other figure, no other generic figure, right? No, and then she is basically her pointing like, hey, whenever you're down, look look to this man, look to this God, look to Jesus. And I followed in those footsteps, and in Jesus' name, it makes everything so concrete. Sorry, you just gave me a big aha moment.
yeah, lovely.
So how, especially with music, there we go. Let's
Okay, yeah,
hit
let's
on
talk.
that. No, how do you know when you feel successful, or how do you know when a song is done?
Oh man, that's such a good question, and such like a different avenue of thought that I think about a lot. Um, I mean, the simple answer, like I don't have other words for it than this, though. I know you can only know what this means from experience,
Mm,
but it's like the song to me, the song is done when like hmm, when I've satisfied my own desire to hear something that I wanted to hear. Right? Like I
mm,
write a song in order to like give myself a song to sing. Right? Like
mm,
there's just being convinced that like there's a bazillion songs in the world. There's not enough. There's one I need to hear that I haven't heard yet.
yeah.
And it's gonna be very similar to lots of other ones. And you're drinking from all these different wells of these different influences you draw on. But you've got a song worth singing when
Mm,
you're no longer trying to live up to
mm,
um like I just want to be as good as this guy. Like I just want to do what they're doing.
yeah, yeah,
When all I'm really trying to do is like, here's where they are, here's where I am
yeah.
at,
Hmm.
and I'm just trying to like get there. Like I feel like as an artist, if that's where you are, you just have to keep going, just keep doing that. But there's going to be like a psychological and even like moral development
Yeah.
that will be necessary as an artist to get past just being kind of a cheap knockoff.
Hmm.
Um, and that comes from when like you're not making the song to like impress other fans of
Yeah.
the same person you're inspired by. When you have enough of a sense of like what you find pleasing melodically and lyrically and rhythmically and all those things that you're like I really don't care if anybody else in the world likes this. I love
Yes.
it. And like the song needs to go out into the world. I am I am convinced because like uh I'm so taken with like how pleasing the song is.
Yeah.
And you do that knowing that like it's not going to be for everybody.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, no art is for everybody, or like if your aim is to please everybody, it's
Mm,
going to be pretty generic. Um, but I think over time I've grown as an artist just to be convinced that if I've got a song to
mm,
sing that's like authentic, like I really believe in, and I'm really passionate about it, and I really think this is good, it'll find its people, like
yeah.
it'll find its audience. Um, I need to be satisfied with whatever size of audience that is. Um, Something I do struggle with. The numbers are, always a tempting thing to get obsessed
Yeah.
with, and they
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
mean something, but they don't
Yeah.
mean everything. They
Everything.
don't
Yeah.
even mean much. But the song. I mean, on one level, a song's never done. This
Yeah.
is Sting, and I don't even know where he got it from. But a friend of mine and I, fellow artists, we quote it all the time. Sting having said, "Art is never completed, only abandoned."
Yeah.
Um, and that's there's something true about that. But on the other side, when it's ready to be abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah.
That like you've gotten to a point where like I could keep tweaking this, but I'm past the point that it would do any good.
Mm,
It would just be changing it to change it. Where I've got to a point where like this is ready because I can listen to it.
yeah.
I can perform it. I can sing it, and listen back to it and be like, um, yeah, I guess satisfied with it within my own within my own skin, and I'm not constantly asking myself, what would this person think? What would that person think
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah.
I do indulge those thoughts once the thing is complete. Once I put my
Yeah.
stamp on it, then I start to think about like how it might be received by
Yeah.
others. But I just don't let that thought in at all
Mm, yeah.
in the sort of like development process and the like, yeah, in the terms of asking, is the song done?
Yeah. Well, there's something that you said in the beginning too. It's like we, my 9 hours class, we actually talked about poetry and we tried to define poetry, and
Mm,
it's something I just a childlike faith. The way they responded, it was so simple but so profound. I was like, this is it. This is everything, and it's like a full circle moment. He said, "Mr. Reese, poetry, it just means something that you wanted to say."
yeah,
Right? It means something that you always wanted to express. And once you express it, it's there. I was like, all right, all right. Versus getting caught up in academic publishing, comparing
sure,
these
sure.
giants or whatever you're chasing after, whatever wind you're chasing after. I mean, yeah, you can come up with aesthetics, technique, craft, whatever way of doing things. But if you lose um, the fact that it's supposed to mean something.
Yeah, I will say it, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this. Like I am, and I have no problem admitting this.
Yeah.
Like I might even be proud of it.
Mm,
I am obsessively um, uh, critical and revising and
yeah.
editing my own work. Like
Yeah.
it is months when I will come up with a song, I will demo it,
Yeah.
and I will listen to that demo
Yeah.
every day in the car several times for weeks.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing about like the recording technology I use now is like um I can get home from
Yeah.
having driven home from work and listening to something, and like a guitar part might bug me, a vocal line
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
bug
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lyric might bug me, and I can just come inside and like get the stuff. It
Yeah.
takes me 2 minutes to set it up, and I can change it, and then again let's go back to all right, listen over and over. And so
Yeah.
to me, the song's done when I can listen and like everything fits, because
Mm,
along the way it's very rare that happens on my first take,
yeah.
lyrically,
Yeah.
um, instrumentally, or the vocal melody. Like you do a first pass, you put it down, and then you like. I'm nowhere near the question
Hmm.
of like, is this ready for the world? I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm satisfied with it for like weeks. Um, and so sometimes it's minor changes.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
nope, that verse
Mm,
is not quite saying what I wanted to say,
yeah.
and I need to take another stab at it.
Yeah.
And so I do a podcast very irregularly, but like when we released our last album,
Yeah.
which in 2021, No, 2022. September 2022, like right after that, like I did a podcast series where I went through every song on the record. Um,
Wow.
and it's called the Too Bad Eugene podcast. And we'll be doing it again when our new record comes out in a couple of months. And I sort of I show the evolution of the songs if there's anything interesting about that,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
keep all these demos, and so on my podcast I'll play. I'm like, here's like what the
Wow.
original chorus was on this, here's what the original bridge was, and I'll just kind of play little snippets. Sometimes I'll play the whole song, varying parts of the demo, because I just think that's a fun.
Yeah.
I feel like I get more appreciation of a song when I kind of know like the story of it
Hmm.
getting to where
Yeah.
it got, and the reasons why it needed to change.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's like, but like in terms of my own filtering process, yeah, it really is kind of it's not like a positive, aha, this is ready. It's like nothing bugs me anymore. I'm able to listen through it, and there's no part where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Mm.
listen through it. I'm like, yep,
Yeah.
yeah, it all
Yeah.
fits. The
Wow.
lyric fits, the,
Wow.
you know, all that.
I there was this bassist that worked with Prince. Just to digress real quick. And she was talking about how Prince tries to record on the first take. But there's a lot of prepping. But
Yeah.
then it's the definition of the first take. So they'll practice it over and over again. And then they'll take a long break and then they'll do a first take again, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and I think what she's gathering is, because there's like when she listens to Prince look at the recordings, oh, this was a little bit off, and she's critiquing. She's like, but he's looking at it in a holistic way. It's like, but that was organic in its time, like
Yeah,
that fit in its time. And so, almost having that perception of if this was like a live concert, and I felt that we all gave it our all, and maybe my voice cracked here, but you know what? That was it.
yeah.
That was it.
I really respect that approach to recording, and I don't share it at all.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
But like, like some of my favorite bands, like the Killers
yeah.
or U2. I know that makes me old to say that I love U2, but I do. But their singers are like that. The final album
Okay.
will have sour notes
Oh,
in
interesting.
the take, but like they don't care, because they're like, like that was like a holy moment. I was like caught up in the spirit, and I was going for it,
Yeah,
and that's what needs to go out there.
yeah,
And to me, a band that is professional, like
yeah, yeah,
Prince, or like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
these bands that live on the road, they're
yeah.
performing all the time. They
Okay,
can get in that kind of,
okay,
they're show ready all the time.
okay,
They're show
okay.
ready in the studio, and so the studio can have that live performance quality to it. Our
Oh,
recordings are not like
okay,
that
okay,
at all.
okay.
I would love it if they were, but
Yeah,
we just don't,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because this is a side gig for us. We're
yeah.
just never in that level of shape.
Well,
Like
for
I think we
yeah,
get there after the recording, like when we're
yeah,
ready to go play live. But it's going to be different from the
yeah,
recording. It's a lot
yeah,
sloppier. It's punk rock. It's kind
yeah,
of sloppy, but not on the recording. The recording, we
yeah,
want everything pretty tight.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
then if you do, like sometimes on a vocal line, you hear me like sing a single line,
yeah.
like that word and that word were recorded like months apart from the words
Oh,
right here and here,
oh, wow.
because it's such an ongoing process.
Okay.
And I'm revising and editing
Yeah.
just all the time. And when I do, I don't redo the entire song.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got parts
Yeah.
that are working, I leave them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's very similar to my approach to writing poetry. So it's like for me, the dramatic scenario or the story, the narrative is there,
Mm.
but how I fine tune it, it's almost like a stand-up comedian working out material. So I'll read it aloud, I'll read to others, and I'll listen for the reaction. But I think I don't know about you, but I think it's tough though too, is like sometimes the audience, if they hear something good, they actually don't know how to respond,
Yeah.
or you're looking because no one, I'm not saying no one's not on your level, but so that's why it's good to have a jury or peers around,
Yeah.
uh, even though
No,
you're
that's
testing material.
that's not wrong. That's definitely true.
Um, is AI coming up in the field of theology? Like, I don't know. I just,
No, it is. And I
oh,
know.
okay.
I mean, I'm not keeping up with it.
Okay.
Like, being a high school teacher and teaching on the side, doing music and reading
Yeah, yeah.
C.S. Lewis in my spare time. I, professional theologians that are like teaching at the top,
Yeah.
theological institutions, they have to read every journal article that comes out and
Okay.
stay. That's one thing. I'm like, I'm very glad I don't have to. Um, I read theological journals every once in a
Yeah.
while when something's, the main thing I do is go to one conference every year. It's
Okay.
actually coming up next month, um, down in LA. That just kind of keeps me. That's what forces me to stay somewhat in touch with what's
Yeah.
going on in theology right now. And then at those conferences, when I hear something, I'm like, "Ooh, that's really interesting," and that might will send me to like a recent book that's been published or a journal article that I need to read to like go deeper down that rabbit hole. But I mean, I like a theology of AI. I'm absolutely positive is happening, and
Oh
people are making
man.
they're writing dissertations, they're making their whole career on it, and I couldn't care less. Um, I'm so not invested in the question of what
Yes,
AI might have
for
to say
sure.
about God. I'm sure it says something, but
Uh,
the
yeah.
theology, there's like the theology of or
Okay.
theology and punk rock
Okay.
theology, and like there's
Okay.
tons of those,
Okay.
and I don't find almost any of them interesting, including theology and punk rock. I love both those things. I don't want to do them at the same time.
For sure. How do you keep yourself focused and motivated?
Hmm. I've never found that difficult.
That's what the young kids call a flex. You're flexing
Oh,
on this.
I mean, I don't mean that to be a flex. I mean, like people who know me, who they just know I'm kind of obsessive. Uh, I just get really into the stuff I'm into,
Yeah.
and you can't get me to stop. Like sometimes I know my wife would like me to slow down, um, and I try to listen to her and slow down. But I will say within teaching,
Mm,
some because teaching can be taxing and it can be
yeah.
draining, and I'm not always on my game
Yeah.
as a teacher. Yeah, I can come in with almost no energy very often because I'm a very old person. Whatever. Sometimes I feel old, but I mean, to me, all I have to do to get out of that funk is just remind myself of what it would be like to do literally any other job,
Mm.
and then I'm like, oh, yeah, I love that I get to do this. I love that I'm able to provide for my family by like talking to teenagers about God and helping them
Yeah.
encounter the things in Scripture and in the Christian life that I just think are so cool. Um, yeah, I'm not saying when I say that I've never found it difficult. I'm not saying I haven't needed to actually do it, like
Yeah.
engage. Like, okay, I need to remind myself of why I care about this.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do need to do that, um, but I've never found it that hard
Yeah.
to remember why I care. Uh, yeah,
What's a misconception people had about you in high school?
gosh, I don't know. I honestly didn't spend that much time thinking about what other people thought of me. Like I did, but I was never very confident that I knew. I'm like, yeah, I care what people think about me, but I don't really know. I worry
Yeah.
that they might think this or that, but I was never very confident that I had a read on it. Like
Yeah.
this is what they're saying. This is what. Um, I think I might have had the self misconception.
Mm.
I think I had several of those.
Wow.
I think there was lots of things I thought about myself in high school. Number one, that I wasn't smart because I was not like a strong student in high school. Um, I was like, I got like C's and D's my freshman year, and
Mm.
that was like maybe more C's and B's junior year. Something snapped like sophomore year. It was more like C's
Yeah.
and B's. Something snapped my junior year where it got harder. Like because
Mm.
I could just
Yeah. Yeah.
coast
Yeah. Yeah.
and get a C or a D freshman and sophomore year. But my junior year, I had to work hard, just not fail a class, and I got sick of that. So I'm like, if I'm going to work hard, I might as well get an
Yeah.
A. So that's where I started to see that I was actually capable of more than I was giving myself credit for. Kind of late in high school, but I still, I never thought of myself as like Like I didn't read in high
Mm.
school. I thought of myself as like I'm not really a reader,
Mm.
and I hear students say that all the time.
Yeah.
It's like you haven't found something to read. When you find something that's like actually life giving in a book, you're gonna want to read it.
Yeah.
Um, like anybody can be a reader, you just haven't found that in yourself yet. And I didn't until like my 20s or so.
Yeah.
Um, I also like I've always been you know, larger.
Yeah.
I was in high school. Um, and I really struggled with like self-discipline,
Mm.
motivation to like exercise. And I think I had a self misconception of just like I don't really have the strength, the
Wow.
discipline, the willpower to understand and be positively related to my own body.
Mm.
I just kind of thought my body happened to me. And
Wow.
I like some people were lucky enough to get these really
Yeah.
cut, active, in shape bodies, and
Yeah.
I was given this out of shape body, which was like,
Mm.
um, it was a lack of taking responsibility for my own with the way I lived,
Yeah.
and the fact that I really did have the potential to
Yeah.
like develop new habits,
Yeah.
uh, and that's still something I struggle with. Health is not a destination; it's a journey,
Yeah.
and I go in and out of seasons um, of that. But that's something I'm kind of focused on, like right now. Again, I was like, no, I need to like focus again on intentional habits of mind
Yeah.
and of like of my body and of being having a more thoughtful relationship to what I'm putting in my body.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think very much when I was a teenager, even well into my 20s,
Mm.
maybe past that, I thought it was something about me. I had a misconception about just like, well, I'm just not that kind of person.
Wow.
And those kinds of self narratives are really damaging and really powerful
Yeah.
and very difficult to overcome. So yeah, I don't really know what other people
Yeah. Well,
might have been saying.
no, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
In undergrad and in grad school, how'd you handle criticism or disagreement? Did you encounter criticism, disagreement when you were doing your PhD?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Gosh, yeah. Like, how did I handle it? Yeah, I won't say I was particularly good at that. Um, I can. I'm a youngest child out of three.
Wow.
Um, and I'm like 5 years younger than my closest siblings. Like my
Okay.
my brother's 7 years older than me, my sister's 5 years older than me. So I always kind of described my childhood as feeling like I had four parents and two of them sucked. Um, like I was an only child. I felt like I was an only child because I didn't have any like siblings that I related to that I could play with. They
Wow.
all just
Yeah.
bossed me around. And so anyway, all that to say, like I would say a personality flaw I have is that it's a little too easy to push me back on my heels and make me self-critical and make me doubt myself.
Wow.
And when I take criticism, yeah, I can take it too hard,
Mm.
and like they're not just critiquing the work, they're critiquing me, and
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not good enough or something like that. So that was definitely a journey because like in college and in grad school, I mean, pretty often I was kind of the smartest guy in the room,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's you don't really grow up when
Yeah.
you're in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
in those situations when I got criticism from like a student, it was pretty rare and like it was thin. I'm like,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is what you're misunderstanding. But at the PhD level, it was a whole different story.
Mm.
I was around way smarter people than me, and they were able to critique what I was doing in ways that I like wasn't prepared for. They're giving me angles I had not
Yeah.
seen coming, and that puts me back on my heels and makes me feel like a little kid, right? I feel like they're like being an older sibling, and I'm that little kid. It's the imposter syndrome that I find myself struggling with much less these days in
Mm.
my mid 40s, but in my like my 30s, when I was doing the PhD, yeah, no, I was those were hard,
Mm.
um, and you get it from both sides because
Yeah.
I mean theology is such a it's a very thickly value laden thing. You're not just like, it's not just like, are you doing good work or bad work? It's, are you the enemy or are you an ally? Right? Because like often, from a theologian's perspective, bad theology is serving the devil.
Yo,
Like you're literally on the other team.
wow.
And it
I
can
never
get,
thought of
it
it
can get
like that.
very
Yeah.
personal. Um, and very scary. So being able to like,
Yeah.
as opposed to like writing a song, it's like, oh, you like it or you don't.
Yeah.
Theology is not like that. You know, theology, you're putting something out there like, here's what's true about God. It's not like, oh, I happen to like that. I happen to not like that. It's like, no, either I think you're right,
Oh.
or I think you're so wrong that you've imperiled your own soul,
Mm.
and possibly everybody who's heard you say it. And yeah, it's not always like that, but it can be. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, dude, it gets scary, and learning how to take criticism in that space. I'll be honest, it's something maybe I never really got good enough at
Mm.
to stay at it.
Okay.
I don't do a lot of theological publishing.
Yeah.
I don't social media my theology at all anymore.
Yeah.
Because man, if you just want to be convinced the world is nothing but horrible, tweet something and see people's reaction. Tweet the sky is blue and watch people tell you
So how you're wrong.
you're
Yeah.
woke or you're a racist or something. Um,
Oh man. No, yeah. The internet has changed everything. I just saw this meme this morning, and it was a Christian meme, and uh someone said, I don't know, one character said something was wrong or they're being in the wrong, and the other person says, you know what, only God can judge me. And then the response is, that might be worse, right?
that's a good response.
Um, it doesn't have to be theology or music, but what's something that excites you right now?
I mean, my answers to that might be really boring.
No, no,
Both of my kids are going to be out of town this weekend. That kind of excites me.
yeah,
um, yeah, it's like time
yeah,
with my wife. I enjoy time with both of my kids as well. Sometimes my daughter and I will go away
yeah.
snowboarding, just two of us. That gets me excited. My
Wow,
son
that
and I
sounds
play.
awesome.
We play music together. My son and
Yeah,
I. That gets me excited. So it's not just when I have time alone with my
yeah, yeah,
wife.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
time alone with any of them.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Wow.
we like this new record Too Bad Eugene is putting out in a couple of months. I'm very proud of. I'm very excited about it coming out into the world. I can't wait to hear people's reactions to it.
Yeah.
uh,
Mm.
I'm super excited about that. um, I'm excited about the days getting longer.
Yeah,
um, we moved into a beautiful neighborhood down by the yacht harbor in Santa Cruz, and we are currently in a time of year where it's very difficult to make use of the beauty that surrounds me. It's like, oh, I'm just inside while it's raining. I might as well be anywhere.
yeah.
So I'm looking forward to. I usually like winter. I usually like weather. Right now, I'm like, could you stop it so I can take a bike ride and take my
Yeah,
dog to the
yeah,
park?
it's a little bit
Um,
weird this year.
yeah. So I mean, it's honestly it's the little things. I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying reading through Narnia right now. Like when I get up in the morning, I'm thinking through my schedule. I'm like, when will I be done with enough stuff that I can just sit down and read?
Mm.
Uh, I'm in the silver chair right now. Next will be The Horse and His Boy. I'm very excited because you know it's been several years, and I'm yeah. Gosh, I can't. I mean, I can't think of anything like bigger
No,
than those
no, no.
things
Those are
that
all
gets
awesome.
me excited. I'll tell you what does not get me excited is like we're in an election year and all that stuff that's coming up. I'm like, okay, how do I just look down,
Yeah, yeah,
focus on like a book I'm reading
yeah,
or things, and then just try not to.
yeah.
Oh boy, yeah,
How do you approach learning something new?
that's a great question. I'm trying to think of like what are things I've tried to learn
Mm-hmm.
that were new. And there's a couple like, I've been working on trying to like some recording technology stuff I want to get better at. Um, After like several months of being sedentary, I'm back at the gym right now and I'm trying to like
Yeah.
learn some technique stuff at the gym to compensate for some minor injuries I've got and stuff. Um, I will say this. I have to prepare myself to be in a learning space, and that preparation can be days. It can be, quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
I have to be in a space where I'm like, okay, you don't have to do this now, but you have to be thinking about that you're going to do it. When is that going to be? And sometimes I'll even tell myself like, okay, I'm going to carve out some time. It's Thursday, Sunday. Sunday, I will like I know this is my morning. I'll get home from church, be lunch. I'll have to take care of the dog, but like okay, so reasonably 1 in the afternoon. I honestly have to be that intentional about
Yeah.
preparing the headspace to do something that's not going to be easy right away. Like I'm going to go
Yeah.
into it
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
knowing what I'm
Yeah.
doing and hope to come through the process where I come out knowing what I'm doing. Yeah, it's a lot of like, mental. So much of learning is just like, a mental game. Is just convincing yourself that this thing is worth learning, that you can learn it,
Mm.
and that it's worth putting aside that time. And so, yeah,
What's a question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
what's the point? Like honestly, this is a conversation I'm having with my students constantly. Like if I
Mm.
ask them, at the beginning of this semester, I'm like, what's your goals for 2024? And so many of them were just like, I straight A's. I'm like, why? And so few of them had an answer to that. And I'm like, and I even tried to convince them. I'm like, by itself,
Yeah.
that's a bad goal. It's self-serving. It's even maybe self-defeating. Um, I'm like, if you don't have like a larger vision of like what education is for, what being a human is for, like, and I tried to cast, a vision of
Yeah.
like God creating these people to join in community and be his
Yeah.
image bearers as they like partner in making his creation more beautiful.
Yeah.
And so you get an education in science so you can contribute to communities like making the air cleaner and the
Yeah.
water pure and the food healthier and those kinds of things because then you're contributing to like a positive um, functional God glorifying community. And the reason to get the A's is because they are some kind of indicator of have you taken a step of growth
Yeah.
in these capacities. But when you're never thinking about any of that, and most of them aren't, they're not thinking about why.
Mm.
And like when I press them, it's like, so my mom won't yell at me. I'm like, that's a
Yeah.
horrible
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
Um, like that will only last you until your mom's not there to yell at you. And you're gonna go to college at some point, right? If your mom follows you to college and yells at you in your dorm when you get a A-, um, you've definitely lost the plot. So yeah, I wish people would ask
Yeah.
themselves. I mean, we need our Socrateses, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Socrates would go into the market and just ask people,
Mm.
well, how do you know? And why? And just sort of like get people to ask almost anything.
Yeah.
What was a question I wish people ask themselves? Like literally almost anything. That would press them into
Yep.
deeper
Yeah.
thinking, other than just sort of like, I'm bored. What do I want to do now?
Across or combining the work, 'cause you do a lot of work, from the high school to Regent Western, to the music you put out, especially in Santa Cruz in that community too. How do you see your work impacting your community in the long run?
That's a good question. Um, where I was with my work in theology like 10 years ago when I was like completing my training for it. I've already been doing the work, but
Yeah.
like, doing a PhD, I was really hoping it was like I would be contributing to like forming church communities that are more like
Mm,
theologically engaged. And I still hope that would happen,
yeah.
but I haven't really seen it happen, at least not under my own efforts. What I think maybe I can see is more often just that, like, just to demonstrate to people that, like, um, loving Jesus and following him um, yields so many different kinds of fruit that are rich in so many different ways,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like my intellectual life can be and should be a part of that. I just want
Mm,
people to I hope in just knowing me, people experience that that's at least a possibility. That being a Christian does not mean being an unthinking person, or that like maybe a person is naturally smart in lots of ways, but because they're a Christian, they're thinking along
mm,
the lines of like, you know, the ultimate things. Um, or maybe especially, they're thinking about the origin of human life,
mm.
the destiny of human life, kind of things, just gets really narrow because they're boxed in by this
Yeah.
indoctrination. And I'm like, no, hopefully we can see that no, like there's a wealth of resources in the Christian tradition that can enrich our thinking within these conversations going on in the world today. They don't have to make you doctrinaire and backward and all those things, and you're thinking. So yeah, like so I hope that's broadly communicated
Yeah.
in the work of teaching I do at the high school level. Um, yeah, in my work with Regent and Western, I'm my hope more is that like uh, at the end of taking one of my classes, these students are less likely to go into the pulpit and say something really dumb and or damaging. Um, uh, that they've got um, not like the right theology,
Yeah.
but they've got a better theological compass to
Yeah.
understand like what theology is supposed to do
Yeah.
and what they're supposed to do as ministers. Like uh, to make sure that like you are giving the gospel as it's given to us from scripture through the tradition, and that you're not giving a gospel of some latest
Mm,
modern kind of fad
yeah.
of spirituality, that you're able to like tell the difference. And music, like that one's the simplest to me. I just think music intrinsically glorifies God. I think when people, especially when people get together and there's music at the center of it, and like that brings like people joy, and they're singing along, and they're,
Yeah.
especially in our context of like punk rock where we play in sweaty clubs and people get like, you know, get into it, get
Yeah.
physical, get the mosh pit going, whatever. I just think there's something
Yeah.
fundamentally human in that. And when I do theology of music with people, and I talk about, like people ask me like, "Oh, you're like a Christian, you're a theologian, and you're a band. So it's like, so are you in a Christian band?" And I'm always asking like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And like, on what basis does music glorify God? And
Yeah.
people have their ideas that are fairly compartmentalized and
Yeah.
dualistic. And in my go-to sort of test case is always like the Beach Boys, "Catch a Wave," and you're sitting on top of the world. So, I mean, younger people don't know that song, but
Yeah.
everybody should. I'm like, does that song glorify God?
Mm,
And I get a fun range of responses on that, because oftentimes it's like, well,
wow.
were they Christians? I'm like, only Christians can glorify God.
Mm, yeah.
That's an interesting perspective. Um, eh, uh, yeah. Do I think that like that song saves anybody's soul? No.
Mm,
But that song is celebrating the beauty of
Yeah.
like surfing,
Yeah.
like the ocean, one of God's most beautiful creations, and like the creativity of human beings that can like harness a way to ride a wave in the ocean, and then just to have a song that just celebrates that. I'm like, I just think that's utterly beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that like that I think God is glorified by music that is not about destruct. I mean, obviously, music can be
Yeah.
non-glorifying to God when it's
Yeah.
celebrating dehumanizing
Yep.
and destructive things.
Yep.
But that song is not. It's not written by Christians. It's not written as a worship song. So yeah, I think I hope my work as a musician, like my basic intention is just to glorify God in that way.
Mm.
Though I will say that our songs tend to be more about relationships. They tend to be
Yeah.
about hard things.
Yeah.
They tend to be sometimes darker. Not always. There's joy in some of the songs I write, but I don't write songs to like evangelize people.
Yeah.
Um, the Too Bad Eugene is not an evangelistic endeavor.
Yeah.
I believe in evangelism, and like I hope my work in a band, as I'm playing shows, like because we just play shows with other bands. We don't play like church shows with Christian bands. So yeah, as I get to know people just in the local music scene, they find out I'm a Christian pretty quickly, and
Yeah.
we have conversations about that kind of thing. And I've had some of the most powerful
Mm.
um, conversations about God I've ever had with people that were not Christians, or at least not anymore. They find out that I'm a
Yeah.
Christian. They
Yeah.
grew up Christian. They've
Yeah.
walked away from it for years, but they just don't have anybody like me to have a conversation with about these things. So they'll sometimes seek me out. And um, yeah, I was at this big punk rock festival up in Canada last June, and I was blown away by how many powerful conversations I had with
Yeah.
people
Wow.
about the gospel at a punk rock festival. So yeah, I hope my work. I hope
Yeah.
there's overlap there.
Yeah.
Like my basic intention is just to play music because I think that's wonderful. But if like to the degree that just being a Christian in those environments leads to you know chances to talk about Jesus, yeah, all the better.
Um, Besides the new album,
Mm-hmm.
what's a goal that you're working towards right now?
Um, uh, do you mean specifically in music or just generally speaking?
Just general.
I would say the goal, like right now, my goals in most other areas of life are just kind of keep going forward. Like with teaching,
Yeah.
um, I don't think any of the goals I have would be like very interesting. I do have some, um, like working with rubrics and like crafting some of the curriculum to get more buy-in from students. So I have those goals, but like, um, I think the more interesting things to talk about would be um, we don't have a like a booking agent
Okay.
as a band
Oh,
because you need
okay.
to kind of get to a certain level of visibility where you're desirable
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, for people like that. And I think we're on the cusp
Okay.
of being at that place. So that's a goal I have for this year is to get some like artist. Like we have a artist uh, like I don't know whether we call him our manager. We
Mhm.
have like a consultant for the band that does help us like connect. Like we're going to
Yeah.
go on a tour, a short tour in March, 5 dates in California and
Hmm.
Nevada. Um, that happened through this guy who's just connecting us to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I'm hoping the next step of that is somebody who would get us playing around the Bay
Hmm.
Area, the Central Valley, and that kind of thing with a bit more regularity because right now I have to do everything.
Yeah.
I have to get us all our shows. If those things go really slow,
Yeah.
um, I have a hard time, doing that work in seasons where I'm really busy. Even though
Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
it would be for a show that's going to be in 3 months when I won't be busy. I'll
Yeah.
be down to play the show. But yeah, that's the goal is just to have
Yeah.
some help with that. Find somebody who can, when I'm busy, is
Yeah.
booking us the shows
Yeah.
for when I won't be busy.
Well, it's just like how you're talking about your preparation phase for working out. I'm the same way. Like that's my type A. Like I'm in my head, like staging all
Yeah.
that, and that takes up bandwidth.
Yeah.
Uh, we are down to the last 4 questions.
Okay.
Ready?
And
All
we're at
right.
2 hours.
What is grief?
so tempted to take the line from WandaVision. Um, it's such a good line.
Hmm.
Do you see that show?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Actually,
mean, it's like it really is a
yeah,
powerful
yeah,
idea. The grief, what is grief but love, persevering?
yeah.
Yeah. This, the last, what's it been, 4 months, 5 months? It's really my introduction to grief on this of this kind. I've had people I love die.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I've never had anybody I depended on
yeah,
die. And Steve, my father-in-law, was like, I mean, there were so many things in life that it was a constant thought process. I'm like, oh, I need to talk to Steve about that. Like
mm,
like I just didn't make big decisions. I didn't have big experiences
yeah.
without having a conversation with him before or after or both. Uh,
Wow.
he was definitely that level
Okay.
of a person in my life, and so yeah, experiencing the process of just sort of like, dude, like you see, like the Psalms use this language a little bit, but like the world literally becomes a different place.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
It's like a person that made the world what it is for
yeah,
me is
yeah,
no longer here.
yeah, yeah,
That means like the sun doesn't quite shine the same way.
yeah,
Like this world is not the same world it was. So yeah, grief is like learning how to be in the world,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
in like in a totally different way.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
it's letting that part of your story be over, and you were never thinking that would be the case. And so yeah, learning how to like keep telling your own story with that chapter being closed.
yeah,
Like it's yeah.
yeah. I
I
mean,
think the hardest thing for me on this, and I know you would relate to this very
yeah,
differently. I mean, it's to kind of hear your take on it, but like between my two parents and my two in-laws,
yeah,
I have four
yeah,
people that like have that role in my life,
yeah, yeah,
and that's one down.
yeah,
I've got to go through this three more times,
yeah,
unless unless I go
yeah.
before one of them does.
And
And
they,
that
hmm,
has been a horrible recurring thought over the last several months. I'm like, this is awful, and this is only one. I got three more people that
yeah,
that have that level of a place in my life, and I like God. Could you just let them all live forever, please?
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, due to an unfortunate event this past week, I've been counseling students, and you know, they're everyone deals with grief differently, and I drew on, I mean, because WandaVision, they articulate it really well, and
yeah,
I riffed off of it, right? Like guitar talk. I riffed off of it, which was, I say it's probably one of the highest forms of love in a sense that, for my position, believing in total depravity, I've like, well, in my relationship with my mother, it's been really hard, single mom, and so you have this codependency, and so it's not the healthiest situation, and you're always thinking about leveraging, right? And when you deal with relationships, it's all about leveraging,
mm,
um, and um, and you think about how selfish some relationships are based off, right? Like what they're founded on.
yeah,
And so I felt very guilty about it. And then I was talking to some students, and they were feeling guilty on what was their relationship true? Was their friendship true? And I said, from my experience, don't let me mansplain or whoever explain. I was like, the fact, and this is a fact, no, this is the truth that you're thinking about them, and in a where we practice out of sight, out of mind, a lot of times. You know, now this person could no longer do anything for you, yet you still think of them.
mm,
That is a high honor.
mm,
And then I didn't intend to do it as I was talking to the students, but I was like, wow, how amazing when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. And, if you're like, no, no, nothing's going to happen. But the fact that, just like you're talking about in Jesus' name, I was like, wow. Because physically, materially, on a physics level, Jesus does nothing for me.
mm,
But his relationship and that past becoming present and living in that, um, of course, gives him honor and glory. But the
yeah,
thing is, it does so much more. you know. But yeah, when I lost my mom, going over through shock, like it hit me when I was going on a walk, where she used to go through walks, and she was asked me, "Hey, go on a walk with me." I'm like, "No, I'm too tired from work." So I walked the path that she would walk. I'm
Mm,
like, and it's a simple, profound thought. I never knew a day without my mom,
mm,
and here I am, like you said, I'm now on this stage. Um, but yeah, I mean, um, yeah, to feel something, and I said, you're feeling something, and I think that's wonderful. Um,
yeah.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
the idea that we might die and nobody notice or care is maybe like the
mm,
deepest worry a lot of people care.
yeah,
And in this case, it's kind of like, well, yeah, you've ensured that's not true for him.
yeah,
Um, it's not a fun way to find out.
no,
But yeah, there is yeah, that's true. Like it is a sort it tests your love. You now know that you love him when he could do nothing for you. Um, that's I never thought of it in those terms. That's powerful.
um, what is love, Adam?
Yeah. Yeah. What is love? I think it's a power by which my own life becomes what it is by being for the sake of another rather than for my own sake.
Mm,
Um, I'm trying to think that through because like I'm trying to make sure
mm,
I start with the idea that God is love, that
yeah,
I not start from the experience of human love as a defining thing. And again, I'm thinking through the realities of the triune God. Um, and I think in all eternity, God is love because the Father has a son. The Father, who I don't even know how to think about this, but is it possible that God might just have existed as a solitary being, self-content in his own eternal solitude? I don't even know,
mm,
but I know that that's not the God that I believe in. That
mm,
the God I believe in is a Father who has, um, yeah, but like it does the Father decide to have the Son? That
mm,
this is a real debate in
mm,
theology, and I don't know where I stand on it.
yeah,
I think it is more than it is the nature of the Father's being,
mm,
that he does not simply exist for his own sake.
yeah,
That and certainly that is easier to say about the Son. That the Son comes into being from the Father,
yeah,
and eternally glorifies the Father, and the Father glorifies the Son. They have their own existence and being for the sake of the other.
mm,
Um, I think that's what love is. I think I love another person when I decide that the meaning and determinations of my own life are not for my own sake. When I live for them, I I think there's something to that, like what Jesus saying, like he who would uh, you know uh, who would seek his own life will lose it, but he who
yeah,
loses his
yeah,
life for my sake
yeah,
will find it.
yeah,
Yeah, they're like I think that there's all kinds of guardrails that need to be there. There is the danger of a kind of like toxic, abusive type of situation where it's a codependent
yeah,
living
yeah,
for the other. Like we have to be mindful of that and
yeah,
make sure that that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a very mutual, um, voluntary, um, uh, putting the other person above myself and finding a truer self satisfaction in that
mm.
than I would find simply living for myself. So, and I'm also, yeah, I'm trying to define love in a way that is like existential, that it's not just like a thing I do.
Yeah.
That it like, no, I think love is like the the ultimate power behind the universe.
Mm,
I think that's what it means to say that God is love. Um, that
mm,
that
okay.
God doesn't simply exist as this powerful thing who decided to be a nice God. No, I think his own eternal existence is is love. And so I think that like, love is the ultimate reality behind all all things. It's often obscured.
Mm.
Um, it is a reality known by faith, not by sight. Um, but yeah,
What is the meaning of life?
I actually, I am not confessionally reformed, but I think the Westminster Confession does pretty good on this. Um, yeah, that the ultimate like purpose, I think, or meaning, I forget
Yeah.
what wording
Yeah.
it uses, but it's like um, to glorify
Glorify
God
God. Yeah.
and be satisfied in Him forever, something like that. Sometimes, yeah, I lose the wording because I don't recite it and I don't have it like memorized. But yeah, yeah, that sounds so overly simple. It's so what students expect me to say, and they are so unsatisfied by it. I'm like, all right, just live some more, try on some other purposes, and see, and then learn how to see that there's like more in that statement. That the idea of glorifying God, they hear what they hear. Oh, like, so you mean it's like go to church and sing a bunch of worship songs and like be a good Christian? I'm like, no, something much bigger.
Mm,
Again, when God is glorified um, by human artistry,
yeah.
science, community, music, when we understand that all of these things were given by God, created by God, like as a reflection of his own being and glory, then yeah, this idea of glorifying God becomes a much thicker and richer idea. Um, and so, yeah, the idea
Amen.
that we would
Yeah.
be satisfied most deeply by God being glorified. Yeah, that I like. That's my answer.
All right. And we're on to the last question.
Ooh.
What advice would you give to young people, especially high schoolers, especially high school seniors?
Constantly remind yourself that you don't know everything. Um, form, yeah, like I think form relationships with some elders in your life,
Mm,
and you know seek out mentors. Be willing to listen slowly and attentively to people who've gone down the roads you want to go down or are inevitably going to go down. Um, I find the young people who have that, I don't worry about. I'm like, oh, you're going to make tons of mistakes. You're going to revise your plans,
yeah.
but you're going to be fine because you're teachable. It's the young person who asks you a question and then as you start to answer it, like, oh yeah, I know. All right, yeah, I know. It's like, okay, I can't tell
Yeah.
you anything
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
already
Right.
know, so I don't know why you asked me. Um, so yeah, I mean, and this is so me talking to my 17-year-old self.
Yeah.
Um, I think there was a sense in which I, kind of thought I knew everything,
Mm,
and there's a certain sense in which, yeah, life will fix that.
yeah.
Life will take
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
delusion
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
you. But I think actually, when I look around, that's not universally true.
Mm,
There are people who are absolutely determined to never learn anything. So they're just so sure they've got it all figured out that they like you see the world, life, God giving them lessons and them just refusing to learn a thing from it. And that almost always is in the form of thinking they already know. So yeah, I think that's the main advice
yeah.
I would give to young people. Be ready. I
Mm,
mean, be aware that yeah, us
yeah,
old
yeah,
people, we
yeah,
have things to learn too. Like I was saying at the beginning of this interview, like I know that there are things that young people have to teach me
yeah,
that I am just as resistant to
yeah,
learn,
yeah,
and I have to teach. I'm reminding myself of this as well. I don't know everything either, and I'm just as likely to learn something new from a 14, 15, 16 year old as I am from a person my age or older. So yeah, maybe that's not just the advice I give to young people. Um, Maybe the advice I give myself and anybody else. But yeah, there's a especially like overly privileged kids have a certain kind of cockiness
yeah.
that is very difficult to break down. Um, and, and
Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on.
am I your
So
longest one?
actually, no.
Okay,
Thank you so much for your insight, your wisdom, sharing your experience, and your open mindedness, just getting us to percolate. Um, we'll definitely talk with you off the podcast about having you on another time. So,
would love to.
uh,
These are great questions. I appreciate the conversation.
yeah. All right, Adam. Have a good night. Thank you.